Hi everyone, this is Sally Fowler. I'm the owner and trainer for Disabled Advantage. Thank you for joining me on my Patreon tier, Service Dog Questions Answered. In this question, number 14, I will be answering, what is service dog training and how is it different? This is a very long answer. So if you're feeling tired today or you don't really have the brain space for a long question, save this one for later. This is a really complicated answer, and so I'm going to try and break it down into points, but it is still going to be very long. Service dog training is something that I'm obviously very passionate about because it's what I've chosen to do with my time. But I do also offer pet dog training, and so I have a little bit more insight into where the differences are, and it's something that I really feel like more people need to understand, that service dog training is indeed different from training a pet dog. Because I think that's where a lot of owner-trained teams go wrong without realizing it, is that they assume that it's the same. You're still training a dog. What's different other than public access and task training? But there's a lot of details that go into service dog training, and so that's what I'm going to be covering in this answer. The other thing I want to be sure to say right off the bat is that if you're looking for a trainer and you go into a trainer's facility or you have a phone call with them and they aren't a service dog trainer, but they train pet dogs and they assure you that they can train a service dog because all it is public access and task training added on to pet dog training, I want you to immediately say thank you for your time and leave. Don't give them your money, because they're going to miss stuff and they're not going to give you all of the information that you need to train the best possible service dog for yourself or your loved one that you possibly can. The follow-up to that is that if you find a service dog trainer and they promise you that they can give you a really, really well-trained service dog in 6 months or less, ask a lot more questions about what exactly they're going to be teaching your dog and how they're going to go about doing it. It is possible to train a service dog in 6 months, but that is if the dog has already undergone all of the extensive other training that it takes to get them to the point where they can learn tasks and public access training. Training a service dog from start to finish does not happen in 6 months. That's not a thing. So jumping into this, service dog training is a multitude of factors that work together to build a confident, reliable, steady, competent, and intelligent dog who works with a disabled individual to help mitigate their disability. There are different types of service dogs. There are medical alert service dogs for autism, mobility, hearing dogs, guide dogs, and all of these dogs are service dogs, but they all have slightly different roles in their handler's life depending on someone's disability. Service dog training might change from job to job. So how a guide dog is trained might look a little different from how a mobility dog is trained. But at its core, all of these dogs undergo extensive obedience training, socialization, public access training, task training. Tasks are the things that the service dog is doing to help the disabled individual, whether it's alerting to someone being at the door, alerting to take medication, helping someone open a door, stand up, things like that. But training is the process of building that service dog, whether it's taking it from a puppy or taking it from an adolescent dog and shaping it, teaching it necessary skills to be a service dog one day. That's what service dog training is. It's very different from pet dog training. So I have several points that I've written out on a list, and I'm going to go through them one by one, and I'm going to talk about them in reference to both service dog training and in reference to pet dog training. Now, when you're listening to this question, I want you to keep in mind that I am just being basic difference between service dog training and pet dog training. Service dog training also looks different from how military canines are trained. It also looks different from how police dogs are trained. It also looks different from how search and rescue dogs are trained and how therapy dogs are trained. They might look similar. There might be some overlapping skills and some overlapping concepts, like both service dogs and military canines need a lot of precision, and they need resiliency, and they need to be able to handle pressure on the job. But how that's accomplished and the situations that the dog is going to be put in one day and the situations that the dog is tested against are going to be different. So there are similarities in how various types of working dogs are trained, but in this particular question, I'm going to be focusing on the difference between service dog training, service dogs who work for people with disabilities, and pet dog training, because I think that's where most people get confused when they start training their own service dog, or when they hear about service dog training and compare it to pet dog training. The first thing I want to cover are goals. The goals between service dog training and pet dog training are similar, but they're different. It's like if you made a list and there were 10 things in the service dog column and 5 things in the pet dog column. The goals that you're making for your pet dog are much more simple. They're much easier to obtain. They're things like, don't pull on the leash. I'd really like it if my dog stopped stealing my pizza. I wish my dog didn't jump out of the car early. I wish my dog didn't bolt out of doors. I wish my dog wasn't a jerk to live with. Things that you just want a dog who you can go on hikes with and who you can maybe go to outdoor patios with, and who isn't a jerk to live with, and who you can have adventures with. This dog that when you pictured in your mind owning a dog, what you have is not what's imagined in your head, and you want to get to what's imagined in your head. And so those are what the goals are for pet dog training. Conversely, goals for service dog training are going to be a lot more. First of all, there's going to be a lot more of them. And second of all, they're a lot more detailed and specific, and they're customized highly to the disabled individual. So my goals when I started training Robbie and when I started training Austin were things like, I need my dog to stop pulling on me, but I need my dog to stop pulling on me because it physically hurts and it causes me to fall down, which is dangerous for my disability. I need my dog to open the door for me. I need my dog to carry a pack for me. I need my dog to find my husband. I need my dog to know how to open multiple doors in our house, run outside, get my husband, and bring him back to me if I'm in distress. I need my service dog to walk beside me in a very particular way so that if I start to stumble on a walk, I can reach down and grab a harness handle or grab their shoulders and not fall down. I need my service dog to see that I've fallen down and run over and help me automatically. And those are a few examples of the goals that we were working towards for service dog training. But you'll notice that all of them are very specific, and they're very geared towards helping with my disability specifically. We also had goals like, we need him to not react to loud noises. We need him to stay perfectly still when children run up and hug him. We need him to ignore when other animals invade his space and not react and let us handle it. We need him to be willing to work in rain or snow or thunderstorms or whatever else is going on outside. We need him to be able to go to doctor's offices with me, go to the mall with me. We unfortunately can't go to movie theaters because they're really bad for my CRPS, but other teams do go to movie theaters. And so they need their dog to be able to go to movie theaters with them and handle being in a tight space in a dark area with loud noises and sudden noises and other people and food on the ground and so many things. So the first thing is that the goals when you set out to train a service dog versus when you set out to train a pet dog are going to look very different. You're going to have more goals for training a service dog than for training a pet dog. And the goals are going to have a much higher level of expectation behind them. And they're going to take more training to be able to reach the goals. Most pet dog courses can be done in a short amount of time because there's less to cover. There's less to teach the dog. And service dog training, there is so much to teach the dog. The second point is the amount of pressure on the dog. So, and these points are not necessarily in order of importance. They're just in order of what occurred to me when I was making this list. Pressure on the dog. Pet dogs, the amount of pressure that a pet dog is going to encounter in its day-to-day life depends on the home. If you have children, your pet dog may have to endure a lot of spatial pressure from your kid invading the dog's personal space. If you live in an area that gets a lot of thunderstorms, that's pressure on your dog. If you have a lot of parties, that's pressure on your dog. But the kind of pressure that service dogs have to be able to handle is a lot more expansive. Service dogs have to be able to handle pressure in training. Their training is very difficult. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to cover. Training sessions can be short, but they can also be longer. And we build up their tolerance to pressure slowly to make sure that we don't break the dog down. But service dogs ultimately have to be able to function in 8-hour days. And that's a lot to ask of a dog to do. That's a ton of pressure. We're teaching them to do a job. And so we have to build up that pressure slowly. And that pressure comes in forms of the amount of time that they have to be mentally active for their job, spatial pressure from people invading their space, dogs invading their space, loud noises, literal pressure of being on uncomfortable surfaces. They have to be able to block out high-level distractions like being in a crowded amusement park and know that their handler is about to have a seizure and alert to it before it happens so that their handler doesn't get hurt. That's a ton of pressure to ask and to put on a dog, which is why it's taught gradually. But those are some examples of the stakes that are at hand for a service dog and the types of pressure that a service dog might encounter. Service dogs are frequently exposed to all sorts of random stuff in public too. People running up to them. I had a man shove an iguana in my dog's face once. I've had other people let their dogs invade my service dog's space. My service dog has had to watch people hurt me, whether it be doctors or other animals, knock me over. And my service dog has had to not react to those situations. Just let it happen. And that's pressure in its own form too. And like I said, it's very different amount of pressure and it's very different degree of pressure than what a pet dog is likely to encounter. And so part of service dog training is gradually building up our dog's ability to experience types of pressure and learn the right way to react and the wrong way to react, And also, as a service dog trainer, it's our job to take a step back from the moment and go, okay, are you capable of handling this kind of pressure? Or are you not capable of handling this kind of pressure? Because if you're not capable of handling this kind of pressure, maybe you aren't cut out to be a service dog. And that's one of the hardest parts about service dog training, is that we're constantly needing to take a step back, look outside of what we need, look at the dog in front of us, and check in to make sure that they still have what it takes to be a service dog and that they're still on the right track for being a service dog. And you don't have to do that with a pet dog. You don't have to keep looking at them every 6 months and going, do you still want to be a pet dog? Do you still like your life? Are you still having fun every day? And there may be some pet dogs where it's, I think you would be happier as a working dog. And so there is that aspect to pet dog life. But mostly for pet dogs, we're not having to constantly check in with them and say, okay, do you still actually want to be here? Which, while I'm on that point, that leads me to my next one, which is part of service dog training is picking and evaluating your dog for resiliency. How well can they handle that pressure? How well can they handle something weird happening and looking up to you to deal with it, or to not react, or to share a moment of what just happened to me? My first year training Robbie, I had a really crappy jaw. I hadn't been to the dentist in a while, and when I finally found a dentist who was willing to listen to us about the CRPS and willing to be compassionate towards my disability, the news was that I needed multiple root canals and cavity fillings, and that I was going to need a bunch of work done in a hospital under anesthesia. And Robbie was about 9 months into his training at this point. And so he had to go to the hospital for the very first time and be separated from me and be in a waiting room. And it was a new experience. It was an experience we hadn't trained for yet. He'd gone to doctor's offices, but he'd never undergone something like that yet with me. And I couldn't talk for a little while afterwards because my mouth hurt so bad. And so we went from a steady routine of training to suddenly having to rely a lot on our nonverbal commands. And he excelled. He didn't crumble. He stayed focused on me. He stayed functional with me. We were still a team. We adapted. He focused on my nonverbal cues, and we even sort of developed our own weird little language based purely out of necessity. He rolled with it, basically. And then I got to the end of a month, and my jaw dislocated. And because doctors wouldn't help me, my jaw was dislocated for a month and a half. And in that time, we had to adapt again because I was in so much pain and I was so dizzy from the meds I was on trying to get my jaw to close. No, didn't close. Ended up having to have surgery. It was a very long year. And Robbie got really bored because I wasn't giving him enough stimulation. And this boredom turned into, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And so tasks that we were previously having a really hard time teaching, like retrieve, I tried doing it with him because I didn't really need to talk for it. And he picked it up really fast because he was so desperate to learn and get back on the job. And a dog who wasn't resilient would have crumbled in that situation. A dog who didn't have a drive to work would have probably been really okay with all of the bed snuggles and then been resistant to go back to work when I was okay again. A dog, and when I went in for my jaw surgery, they didn't see us for a really long time. And it was the longest we'd ever asked Robbie to hold his potty before in a public location. And I think we ended up asking him to hold it for something like 9 or 10 hours, which doesn't sound that bad, except that I train my dogs on a 4-hour potty schedule so that I know that they definitely aren't going to go in a store. And asking him to hold it for that long was a new thing for him. He was still only about a year into his training at that point. And it wasn't just, you need to hold your potty for 10 hours. It was also, you need to hold your potty for 10 hours. You need to not play for 10 hours. You need to not be restless for 10 hours. You need to not vocalize for 10 hours. You need to basically be a statue for 10 hours. And he was. And it was incredible. He proved that day that he had the mental resiliency to be a service dog. And it was perfect. And once I got taken back for surgery, my husband was able to take him outside and give him a little walk around. They did some stairs, I think. And he also got some more walks up and down the hallway during my stay at the hospital. And it was okay. But a dog who didn't have what it took to be a service dog would not have done well in that situation. And that's just one example of a situation where we didn't have control. We want to put Robbie's needs first as many times as we can. We try to take best care of our service dogs. But that situation was out of our control. My husband didn't feel safe leaving me alone because the nurses and the doctors weren't listening to us about my CRPS and my needs. He needed to be there to help look out for my safety and to advocate for my health. And Robbie couldn't be told, hey kid, go outside, use the bathroom, walk around the block, come back, it's cool, because he's a dog. So that's just one instance. But a pet dog is never going to experience a situation like that. They might experience being asked to hold their pee for 10 hours because their owner had to work late, but they're not going to have to hold their pee for 10 hours while also maintaining seriousness and level of professional decorum in a place with a lot of distractions and in a place they've never been before. They're doing it at home, low distraction. They're probably in their crate. Hopefully, if they're not in their crate, they really should be. It's a totally different situation. And so part of service dog training means picking the right dog. Picking a dog who shows signs of resiliency. It's hard to look at a dog and go, yep, you're resilient. But you look at it while you're training the dog. So how well does the dog hold up during training sessions? How well does the dog hold up if yesterday you did a 5-minute training session, but today you do an 8-minute training session? Do they fall apart or do they stick with you? How well does the dog stick with you when you get them frustrated on purpose? Which is a very delicate thing to do in training, but it is important for service dog training. We have to be able to push their frustration a little bit because there are going to be times where they get frustrated on the job and we need to know how they're going to react. And a dog who doesn't possess resiliency will not handle that level of pressure. They will not handle that level of test nearly as well as a dog who is resilient and is capable of being a service dog. Not every dog is capable of being a service dog. And that's a really important thing to understand. And that's another really big difference between service dog training and pet dog training. With the exception of a few special cases, most dogs can be pets. There are some dogs, like Robbie, who really needed to be a working dog. He did not do well as a pet, and that also is what told us he was going to be a good service dog because he needed a job. He was immensely destructive and very clever and very devious with his energy. In general, though, any dog can be a pet dog. You don't have to agonize over, is this the right fit for me when you select a pet dog? Now, I do encourage people to think about the dog that they're bringing home, think about their lifestyle, think about what they're wanting to do with a dog. If you're wanting to get into agility competitions, I don't recommend a French Bulldog or a Pug, but you could also do it and it might work, sort of. But when you're looking for a service dog, you have to be very, very particular about what dog you're looking for because of the training that's going to follow. That dog has to be able to withstand the training that's going to follow. And not every dog can be a service dog. You can't just wander into a shelter, pick one, and go, yep, that's my service dog. It took about 8 months to find Robbie, and it took about 2 months to find Austin. But when I was looking for Austin, I had a better idea of what to weed out. Whereas when I was looking for Robbie, I was just kind of wandering around in the dark, hoping I was doing the right thing. Since then, I've developed a much better method for evaluating shelter dogs for their service dog candidacy. I used that technique for finding Austin. So I was able to find him a lot faster. But I also got the luck of the draw. I got lucky. He was there. It worked out. But some dogs just don't have what it takes. They have too many behavioral problems to start. They were poorly bred and have health problems, or their body build is wrong, or they're the wrong breed for what you need. If you need mobility, you need something that's bigger than 65 pounds and taller than 23 inches. So bigger than a Labrador, honestly. If you are looking for an alert dog, you need a dog who's really in tune with their person, not a dog who really doesn't care about you. And so there's a lot more that goes into picking the dog to make sure that they can handle the training, that they'll succeed at the training. Whereas pet dog training, pretty cookie cutter. Most pet dogs can pass dog training if the dog trainer is good and knows what they're doing. And if the owners follow through afterwards and keep the dog consistent on things. But I guess the key point I'm trying to stress here is that when it comes to service dog training versus pet dog training, the training is as important as the dog that you start with. Another difference is the level of precision that's being asked of the dog. Personally, if I ask a dog to sit, I would like them to sit where I ask them to sit and not get up, walk 3 feet away, and then sit down. But, 1, I have a disability. 2, I train service dogs for myself. And 3, I really like precision because my disability is so sensitive that precision with sit needs to overlap to precision in all areas. When it comes to And that's the same for all service dogs. If you allow lack of precision in one area, even if it's something as simple as sit, your service dog is more likely to lack precision in other areas as well, including task work. So it's the difference between putting something in a basket or throwing something off to the side of a basket. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but precision is a huge deal when it comes to service dog training, and not just for people with sensitive disabilities like myself with CRPS. With pet dog training, precision may not be all that important. If you are not doing stuff like obedience classes or obedience competitions, you may not care if your dog takes 20 seconds to sit down or looks at you. Maybe you wanted your dog to lay down across the room, but they move forward about 12 inches and then lay down. You may not care because, hey, they laid down. That's great. It worked. That's fine. But that's the difference. Service dogs have to be really precise because Okay, so this week we were shopping for groceries, and I asked Austin to stand beside me while I looked at a shelf. And Austin is really bad about shuffling side to side when he gets bored. And he was starting to shuffle his hips more and more out in the aisleway. But the more he did that, he was in the way of other shoppers and he was at risk of being hit by a shopping cart. So I had to correct him and put him back where I needed him to be and really focus on, no, you need to stand here. Pet dog owner doesn't need that level of precision. If you want that level of precision, great. Make a consult with me. Let's talk. I'd love to help you get that level of precision. But it's not a necessary skill for their everyday life the way it is service dogs. Additionally, one area where precision is really, really important for mobility dogs is that if your mobility dog is helping you with counterbalance or preventing falls, they need to be walking beside you in a very specific spot. So, most dog trainers can teach your dog how to heel within a few weeks. But that's because heel for pet dogs is generally stay near me on one side of my body. It's okay if you sniff some stuff, but don't pull on the leash and keep moving forward with me, and don't go bonkers when you see a squirrel. It might be a little bit behind the owner. It might be a little bit ahead the owner. It might be off to the outside some. The dog might be allowed to float forward or backwards or out to the side a little bit, or be right up next to the leg. There's some dog trainers who teach pet dogs how to heel with the dog's shoulder snuggled right up next to their leg, looking up at them, making direct eye contact the entire time. And I find that annoying, but that's a different thing. Mostly I find it annoying because if my dog did that to me, I would fall down. It would trip me and it would hurt a lot. And for mobility dogs, that particular position while we're here is very dangerous for the dog, because if you brace on the dog while they're pushing up against you and looking up at you, their spine is shaped differently and their balance is off, and it's more likely that you're going to hurt them or hurt you. So do not train that type of heel to a service dog. But when you train mobility dogs how to do counterbalance or bracing heel, the dog has to be in a very specific position. They cannot float forward. They cannot float backwards. They cannot move out to the side. They have to stay in that specific position for long periods of time. That is incredibly hard to do. It took a year to teach that to Austin. Typically, my program takes about 3 to 6 months, depending on the dog. But it took a year to teach it to Austin because he wants to be ahead so badly. He loves pulling and he loves being out in front. And so teaching him to be aware of his space next to me and to maintain that for long periods of time was really, really hard for him. But that level of precision is so important, because if I fall, I need to know that my hand is going to land in the exact right spot on his shoulders. Because if I land on his neck, I hurt him and I fall down. If I land on his back, I hurt him and I might fall down. If I land on his butt, I'm definitely going down. And he also might go, oh, somebody touched my butt. I should sit down, because that's the base cue for sit. If he's not there at all, I'm definitely falling down. So precision is extremely important for service dogs. It might be something that pet dog owners like and want, but it's not something they rely on for the benefit of their health and well-being and management of a disability. Service dog training is building towards a dog being a certain level of reliability and repeatability every single day. We understand that our dogs are not robots. We understand that our dogs have off days. In particular, Austin has days where he gets sassy and vocal. Robbie would have days where he also got sassy and vocal, or he'd have days where his approach was, nah, I'm good. You're fine. So service dogs certainly have off days, and we allow for that, but within reason. We still, part of service dog training is teaching our dog how to wake up every day and be prepared to work with us on a consistent basis and in a consistent manner every single day, no matter what time of day it is. And even if they're a little bit tired, we still ask them to show up and do their job. Pet dogs aren't subjected to that. We want them to be reliable, and that once we teach them not to bolt outdoors, we need you to definitely not bolt outdoors anymore. And that relies on us being consistent as well to reinforce, hey, we don't bolt out of doors. But a service dog or a pet dog's life might look the same, it might look different each day, but we're not depending on them. They're depending on us. And it's a different dynamic. We rely on a service dog to remember their tasks and remember their commands every single day, to be willing to get out of their bed and come help us every single day, to be willing to put on the professional attire and go into town and handle distractions and stress and pressure multiple times a week, sometimes every day. Most teams do get off days during the week. We try to, but every team is different. My dogs get off hours and off moments more than they get specific off days, just because my schedule varies so much. In particular, with particular reference to guide dogs. So my disability is variable every day. The tasks that I ask for might change every day. But when you have a guide dog, the guide dog always needs to guide their handler. That doesn't change. And so when you're training a guide dog, you need to factor in training every single day to make sure that the dog can handle training every single day, to prepare the dog for their job of working every single day. And guide dogs have to constantly be aware of what they're doing and what is in their environment to help keep their handler safe, because their handler may or may not be able to see it. They might see it, but it's a little fuzzy. And so they rely on their dog to be reliable every time they go out into the world. And they still make mistakes. Like I said, all service dogs have off days, and that's fine. But we're looking for 90 to 95% reliable results every time we work with our service dog. And that level of reliability is not really there for pet dogs. We expect them to maintain their training. We'd like it to stay there, but so many pet owners are ignorant of the reality that they're the ones who have to keep up the dog's training so that the dog maintains that skill. Service dogs maintain that skill because we're making them work every day. So service dogs are constantly getting refreshed on what's going on. They're constantly using what we teach them. And that's different from pet dogs. Pet dogs, they just get to be pet dog. They just get to exist. Play fetch, go on exercise runs, run on the treadmill, play in the yard, be with their people, go on adventures. If they have a goofy day, it's something that you put on Instagram. It's a funny story you tell your friends later. If our service dog has an off day, and we end up in the hospital because of it, yeah, it might end up being a funny story later, or it might be on Instagram as like a teaching moment for other service dog teams. But we work really, really hard to make sure that we give our dogs ample off days so that they don't have an off moment when we absolutely need their assistance. I hope I'm being clear. I'm in a lot of pain right now, and this is a very complicated subject, so it's also possible that I'm repeating myself a few times, and please bear with me. Definitely some brain fog happening, but I'm trying really hard to keep on track, and I want to keep with this because I think it's a very important topic, and it's a very important question. Just, if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. Moving on. With the reliability and talking about guide dogs in particular, there's something in service dog training called intelligent disobedience. And basically, this is when we give the dog a command and the dog evaluates the situation and goes, "Human, you are incorrect. I know better. I'm going to make the final call here and do the actual thing that is necessary." And we don't really want that in pet dogs. And there's not very many situations where pet dogs show or need to use intelligent disobedience. There's a few special exceptions, like if you're trying to get your dog to go to bed and they won't go to bed and they keep taking you to someone's room and it turns out that person's having a heart attack, or they get diagnosed with cancer later, that might have been an example of intelligent disobedience. If your dog was supposed to be on its bed, but it's standing at you, it's standing at your face, barking, that might be another sign of intelligent disobedience because your house is on fire. So it does happen with pet dogs, but it's way more crucial in service dogs. The ability to evaluate a situation, look at it, and go, I'm pretty sure you're wrong, and make a judgment call. And I want you to think about that for a moment. We're relying on a dog to know what's best for us in a moment. And that comes from training. Guide dogs don't pop out knowing that. It's really, really cool to see that level of intelligent disobedience. I've seen it a few times in my mobility dogs, but I don't see it nearly as much because I don't rely on it nearly as much. I can see, I can hear. I don't need that particular skill trait. But there are times where it does come into play for my own dogs. As I mentioned before, when my pain gets worse, my brain fog gets worse. So there have been plenty of times where I say the wrong word. But my service dog, through all of our training together, reads the situation, knows what I actually meant to say, and does that thing instead of the wrong word. Perfect example is I taught Robbie how to flip door handles because turning door handles is really hard for me. It's very painful. And sometimes it makes my arm not work afterwards. But there would be plenty of days, and the command word for this was flip. There'd be plenty of days where I would say open, because I was tired and it's door and I need him to open the door. But open means stand up and push your paws into this. And the reason I have different words for doors is because there are different ways to open doors depending on what door we're at. And some dogs can always read the situation and some dogs cannot. So I typically train different words for each method of opening the door. Part of Robbie's training was me picking good brain days for myself and teaching him that this door meant flip. And so when I would have off days where I couldn't remember the right word, I could say any word. And we'd be at this door, and he would look at the door, look at me, look back at the door, stand up, and do the right thing. It wasn't the command I asked, but that's because he knew I got the word wrong. And that was an example of intelligent disobedience. That's something you don't really see in pet dogs. And it's woven into service dog training naturally because we teach them what's expected of them. We teach them how to do things. And we teach them very specific ways of doing things, and we're consistent in how we teach it every single time. And so when the situation or the day comes when they need to make a judgment call, all that training comes into play. They read the situation, they read the distractions, they read other variables that are going on in that moment, and they make a judgment call as to how to proceed. With guide dogs, this comes into play most with traffic. If the handler gives a cue to move forward, but the dog sees a car coming, the dog is trained to not move forward and to not let their owner move forward. And that's just one example. The handler says one thing, but the dog sees what the handler can't and knows to disobey. And it is weird to train a dog to disobey at times, but that's part of service dog training. There will be moments where that happens. The level of distractions and the duration that a service dog has to be able to do for a skill are both longer and harder and more complicated for service dogs than they are for pet dogs. Typically, pet dogs are expected to not chase squirrels, not chase rabbits, not bark at the mailman, really definitely not bite people, be okay with guests coming over, be able to go on walks, maybe be able to go to the pet store. But the expectation's pretty low. And I'm not saying that pet dogs are dumb by any means, but just we don't hold them to a high level of expectation. And because of that, we don't train them around all of the distractions possible. And we don't typically train them how to hold a sit for 5 minutes or how to hold a down for 2 hours without flip-flopping and wiggling and wobbling all across the floor to your heart's content. Pet dogs aren't asked to do that. They're asked to sit for 30 seconds or less. And that's considered, yep, my dog knows sit. No, not the case for service dogs. Service dogs may need to sit for 5 minutes in a checkout line. They might need to lay down for 5 minutes in a checkout line, or they may need to lay down beside a chair for 2 hours in a workplace or at a school or in a coffee shop or in a restaurant. The duration that's asked of a dog is completely different. Also, as I mentioned before, service dogs work long hours. So there are some dogs who go with their owner to work. And if their owner works an 8-hour job, the dog also works an 8-hour job. They have to maintain professionalism and calm behavior and proper etiquette and do all their cues for 8 hours. That is a ridiculously long amount of time. Pet dogs are not asked to do that. They're not taught how to do that. Now, in those situations, we do encourage service dog teams to take breaks and give their dogs time to go outside, use the bathroom, stretch, maybe play with a toy for a little bit, give their brain a little bit of a break. But sometimes it's not always possible. My service dogs, I work from home, but my service dogs can take naps during the day, but they need to be able to turn on their brain when I ask for it. And that may not be routine. It might be random. They might not be expecting it. And so for them, the duration is, there's a lot of napping, but their brain has to be somewhat alerted on me for usually about 12 hours a day with a lot of naps scattered in between. And that may sound extreme, but 12 hours a day is usually when I'm active. And I rest a lot. I sit in my chair and I don't do very much. So I might be working on this answer for an hour. And then at the end of it, Austin needs to be ready to get up and help me get out of this chair. The distractions that a service dog has to be able to withstand are everything that you are going to encounter in your life, basically, which is a lot. And there's no way to train them for everything. So we train them around as much as we possibly can in hopes that it will prepare them for whatever random things happen later. Service dogs, the distractions are people, places, sounds, smells, textures underneath their feet, temperatures, weather, events, experiences. Everything that you experience in your home and outside of your home is a potential distraction that we have to train a service dog around so that they are able to do all of their basic commands, their advanced commands, retain precision, retain resiliency, retain focus on you, and do task work and make as few mistakes as possible and do it as many days in a week as possible and do it for about 9 years. And that all is woven into a service dog's training. We introduce distractions gradually, and we introduce distractions in order as best as we can, low, medium, and high, with every single command and skill that your service dog learns, so that we know that they can handle whatever is given to them in a situation with whatever we're asking them to do at the same time. And that's a lot more complex than what goes into pet dog training. Also, pet dog training is typically done at your home and at the park and at the pet store and in your classroom, wherever you're learning pet dog training. Service dog training happens at home and in class and at the park and in your yard and in your driveway and across the street and in the grocery store, in the pharmacy, in the doctor's office, in the hospital, outside stores, inside a different grocery store, inside the same grocery store, but a different part of the grocery store. You get what I'm going at here. There's so many places involved with service dog training. It's very, very expansive. Service dog training involves more time. It takes a very long time to grow a service dog. Service dog training it involves a lot of complex skills, which involve more layering of knowledge. Teaching a dog to press a handicap button, for instance, has multiple steps in it and has to be proofed over time in a lot of different situations. And then it has to be proofed again with a lot of different distractions. And then it has to be proofed again with a lot of increased pressure. And that does not happen in a 6-week training program. Unless your dog is magical or that's the only thing they're learning, that doesn't happen in a 6-week training program. Service dogs typically take 1 to 2 years to train. That's the party line, and it's also true. Another way to think of it is in hours. It takes about 2,000 hours to train a service dog well. I added the well part there. Different service dogs might have less training that goes into them because the expectations asked of them are fewer. If your medical alert dog only does 1 or 2 tasks, their training may not take as long as a mobility dog who's needing to learn 13 tasks. So there is that to keep in mind. But A pet dog could very well be trained in 6 to 10 weeks, depending on what's going on and what you're trying to accomplish. But a service dog, they have to learn so much information. It's very much like a service dog has to go through kindergarten and grade school and college. They can't just go through grade school and call it good, because then they're not going to be well prepared for their job. And so it takes longer. And if you're owner training, it might take even longer than how other people train because you're disabled. You have to work within your own capabilities. And so, yeah, you might move a little slower. That's okay. If training is taking you 3 years or longer, that's less okay. But it can still work. There are teams where that is the case. Pet dog training is simple. It's very, very basic. I need you to sit. I need you to lay down. I need you to go to place. I need you to not eat my pizza. I need you to walk on a leash nicely. Some basic house manners. Not steal my stuff. Cool. Service dogs learn upwards of 30 to 50 cues, and that may or may not include task commands. Part of that is that service dogs, because their owner's disabled, they need to have a word for every possible thing that you're going to ask the dog to do. So my dogs know commands for turning and moving around something and moving sideways closer to me in a tight space, because since I'm disabled and since my disability affects my entire body and my dog is 85 pounds, I can't physically drag him to where I need him to be. I need a way to not move and to tell him where I need him to be and how I need him to be in that spot. And that takes teaching an extra cue. So service dogs have a massive store of knowledge in their brains, and they have to keep it in their brains, which goes back to that reliability thing and the pressure thing and the resiliency thing and the goals thing. We're asking a ton of these dogs to learn. Some dogs are better at learning than others, and so that's also a factor when you're constantly evaluating your dog. And if you're going through training and your dog just stops being able to absorb new information, that's a sign they may not be ready to be a service dog. They may not have what it takes to be a service dog, and that's unfortunate, but that's something we're looking at too. So teaching skills that are much more complex and have much more layers to them, and by layers, I mean the steps we have to take to teach the dog the final outcome. One of those is my dogs help me do laundry, and I wasn't able to just do my laundry. I had to teach Austin and Robbie, I had to teach them both retrieve and tug and how to pick up things that were soft and fun to play with and not rip them to shreds, and how to tip over a hamper and how to dig clothes out and how to pick up these fun things and not play with them and put them in a basket, and then how to drag the basket through the house, and also how to back up through doorways without freaking out or spinning or jumping around in the air. I also had to teach them how to navigate doorways, how to stop what they're doing, open the door, go back, get the basket, pull it through the doorway, how to hand me clothes or stand up on the washer and drop clothes into the washer, how to get clothes out of the dryer, and then how to bring the basket back to the bedroom. That's a very complicated task. And when I first started teaching it, it would take a very long time to do laundry. I basically had to be willing to spend an entire day teaching laundry, which was fine. But now that he knows it and it's a finished task, it takes about 15 minutes for him to get clothes to the washer. Yes, that is still 15 minutes of doing laundry, but it prevents a pain flare for me, and it makes me able to do other stuff later in the day, and it prevents me falling down, prevents me getting dizzy, and helps with my disability in those ways. That was a very complicated thing to teach. And all of the other things that went into teaching that Austin had to learn first were back, turn, drop, tug, open, close, dig, take, give, put, and spatial awareness around, and common sense. Both of my dogs have struggled with this a little bit. If Robbie ran into a target, and felt resistance on the basket, he would drop it and wait for me to fix it. If Austin feels resistance, he just pulls harder. And sometimes I'm able to intervene, and other times he solves the problem faster. And so I also had to teach my dogs how to problem solve. And that's something that starts at the very beginning when they're in doggy kindergarten, learning agility and balance games and coordination and confidence and problem solving, because your service dog has to be able to solve problems with your help and without your help, because sometimes you're going to be unconscious, or you're not going to be able to talk them through it, or you're not going to be present, and they need to be able to remember what you asked them to do and figure out how to do it with whatever challenges they're being presented with in that moment. That's a lot more complex than what's asked of the typical pet dog. As I said before, the expectations on the dog are a lot higher. We're relying on a dog for our well-being and for our health, and that's a very different dynamic than what's going on with an owner and a pet dog. An owner and a pet dog is you're my friend. I take care of you. You provide me with emotional comfort. I feel better when you're near me. I have fun with you. This is awesome. When you have a service dog, it's okay. You're the difference between me having a good day and me going to the hospital today. And that's a lot of expectation. It's a lot of pressure on both you and the service dog. And that's something that we're able to rely on because of the intense amount of training that goes into training a service dog. Something my husband brought up the other night, which is an excellent point, is that we're not really going to ever ask a pet dog to be in a dangerous situation for our benefit. And the hard truth is that there may come a day when your service dog has to be in a really dangerous situation because they need to help you with your disability. And for the most part, we protect our service dogs. I step in front of my service dog if an off-leash dog runs towards us. I body block when we walk through the horse pasture if horses get a little too curious with me and my service dog. There may be times when you have to ask your service dog to be in a dangerous situation and not break down and not refuse to help you. And I'm sure your imagination can come up with scenarios, but I don't want to say anything that might trigger anyone. All I'll say is that there have been a lot of really crappy situations happen in our country over the last few years, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if there had been a service dog team present and that service dog needed to stay solid to help their owner survive a situation. The instance where we were talking about it was I'm working on teaching Austin how to be in inside place and then hear his recall command and open multiple doors to come to me outside. We're in Missouri and it's very hot, it's very humid. And one day this week we had a day where it was 105 outside and the heat index value was 110, I believe. And so really I shouldn't have been outside at all, but we have rabbits and I wanted to take them fresh frozen tiles every 2 hours and check their water supply. But I knew those were unsafe temperatures to expose Austin to for the amount of time I was going to be outside, which was 5 minutes, but it was still not going to be healthy for Austin to do that to a system to go from AC to that. So I left him inside, but I cracked the doors so that if I fell down, if I suddenly needed his help, I would be able to call him out to me. It occurred to me, thankfully, that didn't happen. I was fine. But it did occur to me later that I hadn't formally trained that. I was relying on Austin's ability to problem solve and learn in the moment to do it. So I am going back now and making sure that that's a part of his skill training that I'm teaching him. But I was talking about it with my husband and I was making sure that in the moment, Austin would be okay if I needed that from him. And he said that Austin's coat would probably insulate him from the heat for the amount of time that it would take him to rush through the doors, get to me, and bring me inside, and that he would probably be fine. Where it would be a problem is if he was outside with me for a sustained amount of time, walking around and moving and actively working. But that was when he brought up that, there may very well be times when I have to ask Austin to be in a situation that might put him in danger so that I can have assistance. And that's a very difficult consideration to make. And we don't include dangerous situations in service dog training. I want to be clear. We don't purposefully put our dogs in danger when we're training them. But it is something that needs to be in the back of a good service dog trainer's mind when they're training the service dog to have a lot of confidence and have a lot of agility and good balance and good coordination and the ability to problem solve and absolute resiliency and great handler focus and a great connection with their team, because all of those things will come into play when a dangerous situation does occur. All of us want to never experience a dangerous situation with our service dog, but the reality is that for a few of us, a dangerous situation may arise. And in that moment, we need to know that we can rely on our partner in a very similar way that military and police officers rely on their canines. And they sometimes have to put them in extremely dangerous situations for their benefit. And it is really difficult. But it is something that does get factored into their training in all the little ways of preparing them for doing really, really hard days at work. There are times in a service dog's training where we teach them contradicting concepts. With pet dogs, we try to be very clear, very consistent, and we don't give them a lot of confusing messages. Service dogs, it's different. There are times where we teach them contradictory things. An example of this is impulse control and spatial pressure. Spatial pressure is a way to communicate with your dog. So if you walk towards them, you want them to move out of your space. If they cut in front of you, you walk into them to tell them to get out of your space. If they are being slow about following through on a command, you puff your chest up and you make yourself a little bit bigger, and they, oh, you're serious, and they do the command. Service dogs, I teach my service dogs and I teach my service dog clients how to both respond to spatial pressure and how to withstand spatial pressure and ignore it and not respond to it. Kind of like building an on-off switch. Times when I want my dog to respond to spatial pressure are when I'm asking them to, recently I started teaching Austin how to move laterally because it's an important skill for pulling a cart. And I'm teaching this to him by walking against his shoulder perpendicularly while I hold a treat. And it encourages him to move sideways. But if I put Austin in a down and then I run past him, part of his training included, you need to hold this down. So the way I do it with my service dogs is that if we're active and we're moving and I apply spatial pressure, I expect you to keep moving. If you're stationary and I apply spatial pressure, I expect you to not respond to spatial pressure. And there are exceptions to that. If my dog is laying in the center of the floor and taking up all of the space, I kind of shuffle into them to get them out of the way. But sometimes I also just say, please move, and they get up and move. The reason for this is that when you're in public, your service dog is going to be subjected to all types of spatial pressure, and you need to know that they're not going to move away from that pressure. These are things like shopping carts being pushed past them, children running up to them, other animals invading their space, grown adults invading their space. Other examples of spatial pressure apply directly to task training that service dogs undergo. When a service dog is braced on, you're standing very close to them and you're leaning over them, and they need to not move backwards or sideways. They need to stand rock solid while you're bracing on them. When you are dizzy, same applies. And this is something that I've found confuses pet dog trainers. But it's vital for service dogs to be able to read the moment and know I need to stay here or it's time to move. And that's something that's woven into service dog training that is not woven into pet dog training. Typically, pet dog training is spatial pressure means to move away from the pressure or move in a different direction from the spatial pressure. Whereas service dogs training includes specific situation setups where we teach the dog it's time to move away from the spatial pressure or it's time to withstand the spatial pressure. One of the ways I taught this for my own service dog was actually with a giant rubber ball that's for horses to play with. It's also a tool that's used to teach horses to withstand riots if they're going into mounted police training. But it's just a big rubber ball. But I can roll it past my dog. I can bounce it past him. I can let it bounce gently off the side of his body, and he'll stay in whatever command I asked him to do because I included that in his training. Now, this is a very advanced skill. This is not something I recommend you immediately start doing after you get done listening to this answer. I taught this very gradually over time by doing things like asking my dog to be in a down and then walking past him, or running past him, or sitting past him, or running straight up to him and stopping short of getting to him. And a lot of other skills and exercises that we did before we got to the ball. But I demonstrated the ball to someone recently, and they were really surprised at his ability to just stand there and pretend like it didn't even exist. And that's something that's very different from pet dog training. My last 2 points, got a little bit more. Service dogs have to be trained in agility, balance, and coordination. That is non-negotiable. People who are not doing that are asking for a mistake to happen at some point. Our dogs have to be extremely fit because we're asking them to work long hours and we're asking them to do extraordinary things with their bodies. This is exceptionally true if you have a guide dog or a mobility dog, but it should be held true for all types of service dogs to be in excellent condition. They need to learn and develop their balance muscles and their coordination so that when they're maneuvering in public, they're not a bull in a china shop wandering around, bumping into everything. And that goes back to precision as well. Service dog training also needs to include confidence games, things like running across stumps, running over bubble wrap, being around tarps, being around loud noises. Maybe includes doing jumps, climbing on and off of things, going through tunnels, going through streamers, anything that's going to test their confidence and test their resiliency and test their ability to overcome and push through in a moment, because they might encounter something similar one day when they're on the job. And we need to be assured that just because they encounter something that makes them pause a little bit, they have the skill and the knowledge and the confidence to go, okay, well, this is weird, but I'm going to do it anyways because I know how to. And while I recommend agility, balance, coordination, and confidence games for pet dogs, it's not something that is going to be relied heavily upon. It's more something that benefits the dog itself for longevity of life and mental stimulation and fun games to play with their handler, more than it is something that's going to be relied upon to help manage that person's disability in the best possible way one day. Okay, finally, one of the differences between service dog training and pet dog training is that, and I've mentioned this before, but I want to tie it in specifically to washing and retiring. We are constantly evaluating team dynamics. If you got your dog trained through a program, a good program is going to reevaluate your team every 1 to 3 years to make sure that your team is still functioning at optimal levels, that problems haven't arisen, or that the dog isn't injured, or that the dog is losing interest or drive in the job and needs to be retired early or washed from service dog training completely. I want to clarify here. Washing means the dog failed at service dog training. And that's a harsh way to put it. But service dogs get washed for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes the dog just doesn't have what it takes. Sometimes the dog doesn't have enough motivation or drive to do the job. Sometimes the dog gets attacked in public by a person or another animal and then isn't able to focus on the job or develops reactivity, aggression, or fear problems and can't do their job. Sometimes the dog develops some sort of illness that makes it very difficult or impossible to do their job. There are certain conditions that don't present until the dog is 3 years old or older. And so you could go through all of your service dog training only to find out that your dog gets diagnosed with wobbles or early hip dysplasia and can't be a service dog, and you have to wash them. So that's what washing is. And washing can happen at any point in a service dog's training or at any point in a service dog's career for a variety of reasons. So part of service dog training is, whether a program did it or a professional service dog trainer did it or you did it yourself, is taking a step back every so often and going, okay, do you still want to do this? Do you still have what it takes to do this job? Are you doing okay? Are we on the same page? And being willing to accept the answer, even if it's not what we need from the dog, even if it's not what our disability needs. The other side of that is retirement. I had to retire Robbie a year earlier than I expected because Robbie was resilient. Robbie was too resilient. He, at some point, tore a tendon or a ligament and didn't tell us that he was in pain, didn't show any sign that he was in pain or weakness or anything. And it healed on its own, but then developed scar tissue and calcification and started to show more and more. And there was one day where he laid down in a bathroom in public, which I specifically trained him not to do because bathroom floors are gross. So when he did that, it was a oh crap moment. And it was his time. It was time to retire him. We got him checked out by 2 different veterinarians, and they both agreed that his shoulders were shot. Both of his shoulders at some point had sustained damage, probably cumulative from doing his job so well. And we also think Robbie didn't have perfect conformation. He was kind of a gutter puppy. And so we think while we kept him in really great shape and while he was amazing at his job, he was probably also likely to break down early. And we needed to retire him a year earlier than we were expecting. And that's not what my disability needed. That's not what I needed, but it's what Robbie needed. And so he came first. And it was an immensely difficult decision. It put me in a horrible position because I suddenly had to care for an older dog and a dog with his own health needs on top of caring for my health needs and being in a tailspin because I was suddenly without the assistance I had relied on every day for the past 7 years. And I also was now saddled with looking for his replacement. And that wasn't the plan. The plan was to wait for Robbie to turn 9 and then start looking for a second dog and overlap Robbie working with me training the second dog. And that's not what happened. And so it was really important as the trainer to be able to step back and evaluate what was going on, take that into consideration, and put myself aside for the good of my service dog. So while there will be times where we have to ask a lot of our dog and put them in uncomfortable situations, there are equally going to be times where we have to take a step back and put our needs second and put our service dog needs first. And washing and retiring is certainly something that doesn't happen when you have a pet dog. It's not, okay, Fido, you've been a great pet, but you're just pretty terrible at being a pet. You don't seem to enjoy laying on the couch. You are being washed from pet service. That's not a thing. The only way that's a thing is if you accidentally got a dog who really wants to be a working dog instead of a pet dog. Or if you got a pet dog who has some sort of health problem that necessitates extreme measures to be taken for their welfare. But in general, you don't have to constantly be stepping back and looking at the big picture of your pet's life trajectory with you and evaluating if they're still capable of being your friend or not. And so that's one way where it is very different from service dog training. In conclusion, If anybody ever tells you that the only difference between service dog training and pet dog training is public access and tasks, they are wrong. Those are important and those are key differences, but they're not the whole story. They're not the whole picture of what is different between training a service dog and what is training a pet dog. I hope this answer has been clear. I hope it's given you a lot to think about in terms of what goes into service dog training. I didn't focus on how to train a service dog because that can't fit in an hour and a half long answer. But I wanted to focus on specific ways and aspects that service dog training differs from pet dog training to help you understand the importance that is going to a service dog trainer that is working with a professional who knows service dogs. Because you can go to a pet dog trainer, but you're not going to get the level of assistance that you actually need. They also have the potential to teach your dog things that will contradict service dog training later. They have the potential to leave out important skills that your service dog desperately needs because they're good at training pet dogs. Pet dogs don't need a 2-hour long down. Your service dog does. So if you are thinking about going to pet dog trainer because you can't afford a service dog trainer, please come talk to me. I offer free consults. I really want to have a conversation with you. There might be a better option for you. Pet dog training and pet dog trainers, if they've never worked with a service dog before and they've never seen a service dog work before and they've never studied service dog training, they're going to miss things. They're going to get things a little bit wrong. And it doesn't mean that they're bad trainers. It just means that they don't have the knowledge necessary to help you build a really good, reliable service dog for your disability.